Okay, this session is now being recorded. The recording and chat are public record and will be posted on the LCB webpage, lcb.wa.gov, shortly after our meeting ends. Okay, please give me one moment to share the presentation. Okay. Today's Listen and Learn forum is focused on the rules related to axe throwing at liquor licensed premises. My name is Robert Despain, Policy and Rules Coordinator for the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board. Let's go ahead and get started. Our overall meeting goal today is to engage with our industry partners and other interested persons to review conceptual draft rules related to axe throwing at liquor licensed premises, to gather your feedback on these rules in a structured fashion, and finally to go over next steps. So why are we here? The LCB is considering creating a new rule section to allow axe throwing at liquor licensed premises. Our agency considers this a high-risk activity with public health and safety implications. As such, a regulatory framework is needed by way of rules in order to mitigate safety concern and maintain public health. The LCB is currently in the CR 101 inquiry phase of the rulemaking process. Your feedback during today's forum will help inform and shape these rules as we go forward. So how will the feedback offered today help inform and shape these rules? Your comments, thoughts, and suggestions will be combined into a document that will be analyzed and organized by theme. This document will then be presented to the board for review and discussion and will be published on the LCB website at a later date. I want to take a moment to go over the meeting protocol and participant roles. I will be the facilitator for today's meeting. Assisting me in the meeting today are fellow Policy and Rules Coordinator Jeff Kildall and Policy and Rules Administrative Professional Tierney Hamilton Still. Thank you, Tierney and Jeff. Again, if anybody raises their hands or if anybody's having any technical issues or if anything else needs to be pointed out to me, I'm relying on Jeff and Tierney to help. Additional LCB staff from various divisions are also in attendance and have graciously made themselves available should their expertise be needed to help answer any questions during the forum. Participants, all of you who are in attendance, thank you for being here. We will be using the hand raise feature as we go through the meeting. Once you raise your hand, you will be acknowledged and unmuted and be given the opportunity to provide your feedback. Now, one note of that, I've made the mute unmute feature available to all of you, but please, if your hand is not raised and you have not been called on, please try to make sure you're on mute. Thank you. I should also note that for this forum, the chat function has been enabled, but we would prefer chat to be used to supplement and support your spoken feedback. Here are some participation expectations for today. Please stay on topic. The topic for this forum is the conceptual draft rules related to axe throwing at liquor licensed premises. This is the only topic that will be discussed today. If you have other topics you wish to discuss, please feel free to contact us, and we will schedule time with you outside of this meeting. Again, this is a forum to share ideas and solutions. We're hoping to hear from a diverse array of perspectives around this forum topic, but the purpose behind that is not to start a debate. Rather, by listening in a thoughtful way to other points of view and participating with an intent to learn, perhaps we can all land on the best path forward. When you are called on, please remember to identify yourself each time. That will help us tremendously when we need to create the comments table and when we need to respond at a later date to any feedback that is not addressed during this meeting. Everyone that wishes to provide feedback will be able to participate. And lastly, please remember that this is a public forum, so anything shared could become public record.
Hey, Robert, I'm going to jump right in real quick. I see that someone, I believe Riley Harris is how you see that name, has their hand raised. Riley, go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry, I realize maybe you guys are talking about this in the chat, but a lot of us are having a really hard time hearing you. If it's completely silent around me, I have you turned all the way up, but if there's any way for you to increase your volume, that would be helpful.
Interesting. Thank you, Riley. Hold on one moment.
Robert, you're coming in clear for me. So if others are still experiencing volume issues, I might suggest just a quick restart. That's a little strange that some can hear everything and some can't hear anything at all.
Yeah, I currently have my mic on 100%, but let me go ahead and double check. So Tierney, you said you can hear me just fine.
Yes, I can.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I missed the name of the participant. They said they were having trouble hearing me.
Riley was having trouble. She says you're very quiet.
Riley.
Yes.
Riley, sometimes if you're on, I don't know if you're on your phone or your laptop, sometimes there's a way to toggle between an external speaker and internal speaker. In particular, if you're
I
on your
am
phone.
on my cell phone. And I'll just keep it dead silent around me and I'll figure it out. Or I might try to put headphones, attach headphones. Maybe that will help. No worries.
Headphones really
move along. Thank you.
I'm sorry about that, Riley. So again, apologies for those that can't hear or are having trouble. The volume is low. If it is that case and you are using a cell phone, just as Riley said, it might be best to use headphones if possible. Okay, thank you for that, Tierney. So here's how the meeting format will work today. I will introduce the topic as outlined in the agenda. We will try to call on participants based on the virtual hand raising order. When you are called on, please be prepared to offer what you like, what you don't like, and any alternative language for each rule section if possible. Alternative language to the existing conceptual draft rules is strongly encouraged. Alternative language offered does not have to be technical or legalistic either. All right, and so Riley has already graciously introduced yourself. Let's all take a minute or two before we move on to share some information in the chat box, if possible. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and if you're able to and are comfortable, please share your name, Who you are affiliated with or represent. Self is also an appropriate answer if you're representing yourself. Please let us know briefly why you're interested in this topic. And the information provided in the chat will also help with any follow-up after the meeting. Just pause for about a minute here. That's great. I see a few of you have already started introducing yourselves. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go on, but that doesn't mean you have to stop introducing yourselves. Feel free to keep up. So one of the things that I think we find important in these listen and learn forums, particularly for those who have not yet attended one, is to do a brief overview of the rulemaking process before we jump into the review of the conceptual draft rules. There are typically three phases in the agency rulemaking process: the inquiry, proposal, and adoption. These three phases are explained in detail in Chapter 3405 RCW, the Administrative Procedures Act. The development of rules may take several months to several years to complete, depending on board resources, the complexity of the issue, the availability of data, and public interest in the rule. The three phases of rulemaking are distinct and consist of different tasks. We are currently in this inquiry phase, or the CR 101 phase, where we are seeking stakeholder engagement through forums like this, and previously through the open comment period. We're also actively involved in rule development, drafting, and analysis. I know some of you have already participated by providing written comments during the open comment period, so thank you for that. So if we look at the basic rulemaking process as a flow chart, everybody loves flow charts. We're currently right in this yellow circle area, and our next step is to go to the CR 102 rule proposal. So the feedback we received today will help shape the rule proposal submitted to the board. So I won't go into detail through the steps involved in the inquiry phase, but this forum presentation is currently available, along with all other meeting materials on our website under current alcohol rulemaking activity. If you have not already done so, feel free to download and follow along or save for easy reference. After today's meeting, we will gather all of the feedback in a comment table document, respond to comments as necessary, and thoroughly review and consider revising the conceptual draft rules based on this feedback. After that, the agency will draft a proposed rulemaking order consistent with the APA requirements. After the CR 102 is filed, the public comment period begins, and the public hearing date will be set based in part on the filing date. At the public hearing, formal public comment may be offered as both written and oral testimony. The CR 102 also includes Regulatory Fairness Act analysis when applicable. Phase 3 of the process is the adoption phase. After the formal public hearing and review period, the agency reviews comment and makes a determination as to whether the rules should be adopted as proposed or should be changed. The board is the final decision maker for all agency rules. If the board determines substantive changes need to be made to the proposed rules, a supplemental CR 102 must be filed and a second public hearing must be held. If the board adopts the rules as proposed, the CR 103 will be filed and the rules will become effective 31 days later. For this rulemaking project, the steps in green are those that have already been undertaken. The arrow is pointing to the current state of the rulemaking timeline. That is us today in this forum. The following estimated rulemaking timeline for the CR 102 and 103 phases are tentative and based on procedural minimum timelines. If the CR 102 is submitted to the board and approved on March 2nd, the public hearing would then be held on April 13th. The CR 103 would then be submitted for approval on April 27th. If approved, rules related to axe throwing at liquor licensed premises would become effective on May 28th, 2022. So now that we have reviewed the steps in the rulemaking process and the tentative timeline for this rule project, let's begin looking at the conceptual draft rules. Before I do that, though, let me pause for a second just to make sure we don't have any questions. I don't see any hands up. I'm going to take it to mean I can continue. Okay, so the first section of WAC, or Washington Administrative Code, that we will review is a new proposed section, WAC 314.03.060-1, the approval. 10 minutes have been allotted for feedback on this rule section. Again, with your feedback, what you like, what you don't like, and suggested revisions, and please provide actual language for consideration. And also, when you're called upon, please include your name and affiliation when you're recognized to speak. Just give me a moment to change the screen. All right. Can everyone see that? Actually, let me know if you can't see it. Otherwise, we're good. So again, this particular feedback is related only to the section highlighted in blue. Just want to hear what you like, what you don't like, any suggested revisions. Okay, I see a hand up.
Hi, this is Mike Graham Squire from the Washington Association for Substance Abuse and Violence Prevention. And I'm a resident in Seattle. I see you mention best practices in the industry, and if possible, to spell those out in a more detailed list or refer to some document of what those practices are, rather than just leaving that up to people's opinion of what the best practices are.
Thanks for that, Mike. Thank you. That's good feedback. Appreciate that. Thank you. So Mike's comment was to again, maybe offer up what it is the best practices in the industry are, rather than leaving it to those in the industry. So thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, I see another hand up from Val. Go ahead, Val. You are on.
Val, if you're having trouble, you can enter in your comment into the chat and we can address you that way if your microphone is being funky.
Okay, Val, I'll give you another little bit. I think okay, while we're waiting on Val, and again, Val, you can use the chat if your mic isn't working. We aren't able to hear you, Val. I'm sorry about that. Let me go ahead and move on to Riley Harris, and we'll see, Val, if we can get either your mic to work, or if not, if you can put your thoughts, comments in the chat. Thank you. So Riley Harris, go ahead.
Hi there, Riley Harris from Casting Iron Axes. So as far as the best practices in the industry, those of us who have axe throwing venues are usually associated with someone like Waddle, the World Axe Throwing League, and they sort of set standards for us for what the safety looks like and what best practices are. So it's not just kind of each individual place winging it, if that's the concern.
Thank you, Riley. Did you have a follow-up comment to that? Nope.
No, I think that's what I was understanding from the person who spoke before me, that his concern was, how do we determine what is best practices? Did I misunderstand that?
No, I think you're right. I think it was just having like a set standard kind of written into the rule set. And what I hear from you is that you're typically part of a league or an organization that
An
sets
association.
association.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thanks for that feedback, Riley. And if you would, now's a good time. Once you've been acknowledged, if you're able to lower your hand after you're finished with your comment, that helps us see who's in the queue. Thank you.
Hey, Robert, Val can't, her microphone won't work, but they did offer up a comment in the comment section. I'm willing to read it out loud if that's easiest for you.
That's perfect. Thank you, Tierney. Please do.
So they said, my comment was that while I think the best practices should be articulated, there is not one set of best practices throughout the industry. Although there are several governing bodies, not all venues are affiliated with these organizations.
Okay. Thank you for that, Val. Again, we're hearing different opinions on this, and I appreciate that. I think that's really important and really vital to help us in moving forward. So, Mike, we have your hand up again. Is this a new hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I'd say, I'm new to this issue, looking at it from a prevention lens, but I see there's kind of two streams of folks interested in this. There's existing axe throwing establishments, which seem to be well established and have good safety protocols in place. And then it seems like there's maybe bars and taverns that want to add this on as a new activity to their establishment. And that's where I think really spelling out those best practices for folks who may want to add this on to their establishment, but aren't currently doing it, may need some more guidance. Thanks.
Thanks for the follow-up, Mike. Appreciate that. Okay, we have Judy Bennett, I think, was next.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes. Thank you so much, Judy.
Oh, yeah. So yes, I also have a concern about what best practices we're talking about, because are we talking about, well, which industry, the liquor industry or the axe throwing industry? So I'd like to see some more clarity around that. And also, I I would also maybe strike the word encouraged and change it into something more enforceable. I think encouraged is not a strong enough action.
Judy, if I can follow up,
Mhm.
I hear you want to strike encouraged. Do you have any sort of alternative language you would think to offer up in place of encouraged?
Well, something like mandated or required.
So licensees are required or licensees are mandated to follow best practices. Okay. Thank you. And thanks for providing alternative language. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think next is David Marr. Hi, David. How are you? David, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. David Marr with Celtic Axe Throwing. The best practices, I think, is something that the state should investigate for themselves. I wouldn't be relying on WATL, which we find, we don't like their system and their rules. We think they're not as safe as some other facilities. So that would be my comment.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. And I think we have some good recommendations regarding this. And I heard another one that thought maybe to separate out or be more specific as to best practices. Are we referring to best practices around the liquor licensee, or are we referring to best practices regarding axe throwing? So I appreciate that as well. David, did you have another follow-up comment?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead and thank you. Okay, I see Val again. Val, are you able to, is your mic working now? Tierney or Jeff, if Val's mic isn't working, we want to be able to read the comment, please.
Hi, Robert. Val commented, licensees shall abide by ... best practices, or whatever the rest of the language would be, is what their suggestion is.
Great, thank you. That's legalese. That works too. Thank you. And did I see more comments in there?
Mike Graham Squire agreed that encouraged is not strong enough language, and it would be better to require best practices and spell out what those best practices are. This could be additional discussion with the industry on what a common set of best practices should be, is what he said. And then later, Judy Bennett agreed with Val's suggestion for the shall abide by language. Otherwise, we're all up to date on comments.
Thank you so much. And I think that's about time for this section. So I'll give it a few more seconds, and unless I don't hear or see any other hands raised, we'll go ahead and move on to the next section. So the next section is a new proposed section WAC 314.03.0602 and 2 sub A. Safety Operating Plan Overview and the Alcohol Service Hours component. 10 minutes have been allotted for feedback on this section. So again, what you like, what you don't like, and suggested revisions. And again, any alternative language you can offer is always pleasantly accepted. Thank you, and gratefully accepted. So again, just the highlighted part. And if you would, raise your hand if you'd like to provide any thoughts or comments on this. And once you're called on, if you wouldn't mind again saying your name and affiliation when you're recognized to speak. And so I see another hand from Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
I don't see that the hours are specified, and seeing as how this is a high risk activity and you want to prevent overconsumption, it may be good to specify a maximum number of hours or limit what time it can close earlier than what you might have at a restaurant or bar.
Thank you for that feedback, Mike. I think in general, I think the thinking was we would have, with respect to alcohol service hours, in general, it is tied to the license type that the person would be receiving, the person has. Is there anyone from licensing on that thinks you need to add anything with respect to sub A? Any context?
Hi, Robert. This is Nicola. Can you hear me? I could speak to that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nicola.
So I think our general focus was going to be on potentially the amount of service prior to joining the activity, and not limiting an establishment. Because I think to limit hours based on one activity would be to assume that the entire business is only based off of that activity, which may not be the case. And so further down within the rule set, we focus more on how much is consumed prior to a patron's turn to do the activity itself.
Thank you for that, Nicola. Did that does that answer your question or concerns, Mike?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think it might just be good to think more about the hours, either the hours of alcohol service or the hours that the axe throwing is allowed. So, you know, do we need alcohol served at 1 o'clock in the morning with axe throwing going on? Or can either the alcohol end at earlier or the axe throwing end earlier before, you know, someone may not appear intoxicated, but as the night goes on, more likely that things could get worse. So.
Okay, and so if I'm hearing you right, I guess one of your suggestions is to be more specific with respect to the hours around alcohol service versus axe throwing service. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, just because this is a higher risk activity than your normal restaurant or bar, seeing if you need to have some extra guardrails up around the hours of service or the hours that the activity is occurring while alcohol is being served.
Okay. Do you have any alternative language you'd like to offer, or you just want to think about it, or?
Not specifically
okay.
At the moment.
Okay, thanks for your feedback. I am not going to be able to determine who had their hand raised first, so if Tierney or Jeff could help me, or if
I saw Riley's name first, but then I'm not sure between David and Val. So we'll start with Riley and see where we go.
Thank you.
Hi, Riley Harris from Casting Iron Axes. I just wanted to point out that because there is language in there about the amount of service prior to axe throwing, I'm not sure that limiting the hours of either activity necessarily makes any sense, other than to sort of potentially fiscally punish locations, which doesn't seem like a reasonable thing to do. And nationally, there are lots of axe throwing venues that serve alcohol. And there have not been any insurance claims. There have not been, it actually, I know it sounds like a very dangerous combination, but there has not been issues with it across the United States. And there are plenty of locations that are allowing this and have been allowing it for quite a while.
Okay, did you have any, thank you for that, Riley. Do you have any follow-up with respect to the language as it is in this section?
I think that the language as it is just fine.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. And
Val did enter the comment that they disagree with the comment about hours. It would be too limiting on a business. The focus on limiting consumption is what's important. And as Nicola mentioned, it's being addressed within the rulemaking, and the language seems good. That is Val's entire comment.
okay.
And then David is next.
Thank you, Tierney. And thank you, Val.
Yeah, hi, David Moore, Celtic Axe. We currently have 4 locations that all serve liquor in breweries and bars. We, in Oregon and Texas, we shut down our axe throwing at 10 p.m. just because, to Mike's point, we really don't want to have people throwing axes at 1 o'clock in the morning. But our people are OLC certified and will, see a visibly intoxicated person and will cut them off. So yeah, that's my comment. I think 10 or 11 p.m. for me, I'm comfortable with that as a business owner. I don't want the risk of somebody there. I can get messy after midnight. That's my comment. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, David. And again, I'll stop asking, but for now, do you have any follow-up regarding the language as is? Do you see any need for change or any alternative language you'd want to propose be added to this?
No, but I wouldn't like to Mike's point, I wouldn't like to see it too restricted. And, to the point about axe throwing being dangerous, I would go along with Val and say, in my experience, I've run bars and restaurants and breweries for 30 years. A pool table is a much more dangerous thing to have in your bar because it's unsupervised, and there's always fights around pool tables and darts. That would be my comment.
Fair enough. Thank you so much. Okay, any other comments in the chat that I've missed?
No, we are all caught up on that, Robert. All the comments have been mentioned.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next WAC rule subsection. Okay, the third section is a new proposed section, WAC 314.03060 to B 1 through 4. Safety Operating Plan, Alcohol Consumption Monitoring Component. Now for this one, we've allotted 20 minutes of feedback. So again, what you like, what you don't like, suggested revisions, again, with actual alternative language for consideration if possible. And when speaking, if you wouldn't mind, again, to include your name and affiliation when you're recognized to speak. I'm having trouble highlighting it, but it's basically B and then 1 through 4. If you can't read it, let me know. Otherwise, I think we'll just go ahead and open it up for comments. Before I do that, though, now's a good time to just remind everyone with respect to what you're reading right now. Again, this is not a rule proposal. These are simply conceptual draft rules designed for discussion. And so keep that in mind when reading it. We do want feedback. We encourage it. We want alternative language. We want to be able to kind of move this project forward. With that, is there a hand up?
There is. It's Mike Graham-Squire. Go ahead, Mike.
I think a lot of these look like good best practices. I'm not sure if it fits under this section, but one thing I'm wondering is what kind of liquor license will be issued. And because this is a higher risk activity, would it make sense to limit the license to beer and wine or lower proof alcohol rather than spirits being served at these kind of establishments? Just a comment.
That's great. So wait, so just to be clear, you're fine with, thank you for that first off, but you're fine with these rules as they are, but you wanted to add maybe a qualifier around the types of liquor licenses that would be allowed to add this activity?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have any proposed language for that?
I'm not an expert on the types of licenses, but I know that there are, I believe beer and wine licenses, which would be less chance of over intoxication than serving spirits.
But in general, your suggestion is to maybe add a little more restrictions around the license types.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that, Mike. I think we have another hand.
Yes, Riley has her hand up. Go ahead, Riley.
Hi there, Riley Harris from Casting Iron X's. I just want to speak against that to say that I don't think there's actually, and maybe he has evidence about this, but I don't think there's actually much evidence to say that people are more likely to overindulge when offered the option of spirits. And I think it's unfairly restricting restaurants and bars, again, when there's already safety protocol in place. Having 2 beers, as I'm sure Mike is aware, is no different than having 2 old fashions or 2 Mai Tais or whatever it is as far as alcohol content. My husband is a police officer and is specifically trained in this area and has voiced his opinion for me to share, I guess, that it really is sort of equal across the board, whether you serve just beer and wine or you have a full liquor license. If our protocol is in place to keep people safe, then it is our responsibility to make sure that they are not overindulging, regardless of what substance they are ingesting.
Okay. So whether it's a cocktail, a shot, a beer, or a glass of milk, I get you.
Amen.
Okay, fair enough. Did you have any alternative language you'd want to propose, or do you see any areas where you might want to change what's currently written?
No, actually, I like it as written. I've read it several times. And I think having a mass certified staff in the axe throwing area at all times is definitely a wise safety step. And for those of us that are proposing to be establishments that have this, the last thing that any of us wants is a safety event that would be catastrophic for our business. So it's as business owners, it's really important to us that our patrons stay safe. And we recognize that people are looking for accidents to happen in axe throwing venues and are actively working to ensure that that doesn't happen. So I think we will actually be more strict than a lot of other places where, like one of our other guests mentioned, a lot of fights happen around a pool table or at darts where they're not monitored. And this is going to be so carefully monitored. I think that regardless of beer, wine, and spirits, or just beer and wine, I think it's going to be safety conscious.
Okay. Thanks for those comments, Riley. I see several more hands, and again, I'm not gonna pretend to know who virtually raised their hand first. So
I can help you out with that, Robert. It looks like Matt Basinger, and then David, and then Isaiah Harris is the order. So Matt, go ahead.
Sure thing, Robert. Thanks for making time and for putting this all together. I'm with Blade and Timber. We're in Cap Hill. To my knowledge, we're the only axe throwing facility in the state that is currently serving alcohol as part of the pilot program. We did submit 149 pages of documentation as far as what our rules, policies, procedures, trainings look like in order to be able to do so safely. We have been doing so safely since April, and so it would be a waste of everyone's time here to go through all 149 pages of that documentation. But I do think that what we came up with for the pilot program has been working well. And so using that as a baseline to ensure safety standards, I think if other facilities were able to match the systems that we have created, I think that would be a really good start. As we mentioned in our meeting a month ago, we're limited right now to 2 beverages in the state of Washington. That's the only state that has limited us to 2 beverages. Every other state, we self-limit to 3 beverages. We would like to eventually get to the point that the state of Washington feels comfortable with us having our facilities in the state of Washington match what we're doing in other states and have been doing since 2017 safely. But having said that, I would be happy to, I'm not sure if that's already public documentation as far as our 149-page application. But I think that would be a really good place to start as far as the standards that axe throwing facilities in the state could or should be held to. Second, and more specifically to what you have on the screen here, designating mass certified staff in the axe throwing area. I think area is a very loose definition there. I would change the word area to facility, just to give our axe throwing venue owners and operators a little bit more grace as far as one, making sure that there are masked folks who are in the facility at all times, and 2, that it is not quite as important to specifically quantify what is an axe throwing area and what is not. Thank you.
thanks for that, Matt. And so I appreciate your general comments with respect to the protocols in place. And you mentioned changing, I think, sub 1 axe throwing area to axe throwing facility. You did make a comment with respect to drink minimum. I don't see that in here, but did you see a need to put to add any of that to?
That's a great question. And that was what I was getting at, is our policies are spelled out over the course of a 149-page document that was submitted to the state, a year and a half, 2 years ago. And so I didn't know if this was the appropriate time to get more granular as far as what those policies look like specifically, because they do overlap some of what you're speaking to right now. But I also don't think that this is the appropriate avenue necessarily to pull verbiage out of our manual and put it here. I think what I would suggest is that we take some of that language that's already been approved and use that as the structure for which we put language in for this rulemaking and documentation.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I agree. Yeah, we're trying to be really thoughtful and intentional on focusing just on what's in front of you right now. Having said that, if there are certain granular bits from your document that you feel would actually be applicable or would serve as good alternative language to what's on the screen right now, we appreciate that as well.
Sure, and I'm happy to provide that via email, or I can have our attorney provide that as well. But it's a lot, so I'll hold off on audibly speaking that at this time.
Right, of course. Thank you so much, Matt. Now, who was next?
David was next.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is David Marr, Celtic Axe. I just want to reiterate what Riley was saying. Our 4 locations all have full liquor licenses, and I think the more important thing is that we have a certified axe marshal who is also masked, or we call it, the OLCC certified to watch what's going on in the axe lanes. That would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you for that, David. Can I just ask a follow-up real quick? Would you mind speaking to you mentioned an axe specialist or an axe throwing
Yeah, we call them axe marshals. So
axe marshal?
we have locations with 3 lanes and some locations with 8 lanes. So we would assign to an 8-lane location, we would have 2 axe marshals who are in Oregon OLCC certified. They're sort of bartender certified. And that's how we do it. And as I said before, we shut down our locations at 10 p.m. And we have never had an issue at all through alcohol. And we've never had an accident. And as I think somebody earlier said, if you check the records there really hasn't been an accident with axe throwing because they're supervised, unlike pool or darts.
Right. And so with respect to this this subsection, David, do you see any need to add additional protocols? You mentioned the axe marshal, but
No.
is there any way, because this is specific to alcohol consumption protocols?
Yeah.
Do you have any language you think you'd want to see added to this, or any alternative language you want to have included?
No, I think it's designated mass certified staff in the axe throwing area at all times. So that's perfect. But I would not like to see somebody add, take away our ability to sell liquor. Because all our locations have it, and it's never been a problem.
Okay.
I can see where somebody from outside the industry thinks this is a scary business. It's actually not.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, David, and I appreciate all your comments. I think Tierney, was Val next?
Isaiah Harris is next, and then there's also kind of a combination of people discussing stuff in the chat. So we should visit that after Isaiah speaks and then go to Val.
Okay. Okay, Isaiah, you're.
All right. Hey, guys. Thank you. Isaiah Harris, Casting Iron. So, hey, I just appreciate everybody's comments and look forward to hopefully liaisoning with some of these guys afterwards. Yeah, regarding the language, I think there's a couple of things just to remind folks, and that's that the absence of language doesn't mean that a location can't impose more stringent rules for in-house. So if I feel like I only want folks with flannel to be able to throw, I think that should be a great rule. Well, that doesn't need to necessarily be everybody's rule. That can just be a house rule. And so typically I prefer to see a more expansive allowance of activity and then leave it up to the individual business to create a stricter, tighter rule set, and then let the free market decide if they prefer one place with its rule set versus another's. That's just my general take on things there. I would also encourage us to look more at language regarding intoxication instead of a 1-drink minimum or a 2-drink minimum. I think the cutoff should be whether or not you are intoxicated or showing signs of intoxication, similar to driving, right? So nobody here, I think everybody would agree that drunk driving is unacceptable and dangerous. But if you look at the language about it, it's all about driving while intoxicated. So that's, but maybe that's the cop in me speaking. So, and then the other thing was, we talked earlier about, there was some concern about the language of, the word shall got thrown out there, and versus, like, we hope that people follow these rules. And then there's the opposite side that was, well, we mandate that people follow these rules, and a typical classic RCW or WAC code language that compromises in that is often should. So you see shalls and you see shoulds. So I would suggest you throw the word should into consideration.
So you're speaking to subsection 1 with that, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So your suggestion from that is should, and with respect to sub B and parts 1 through 4, do you see any changes in language you'd like to have incorporated, or does it seem okay as is right now?
I can't honestly see the whole thing from here. Working off my phone while taking care of some other items today, but I would just encourage folks to just keep an open mind about focusing language on more surrounding intoxication levels versus the number of drinks, because you could have a tiny person have 3 drinks and absolutely get hammered, right? Or I mean, everybody reacts a little differently.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Isaiah. I appreciate it. Okay, so Tierney, you said there was some activity in the chat.
Yes, so Isaiah just spoke to what his comment was, which was using the word should instead, where you can. And then the next comment was from Pacific Axis that they agreed with Riley Harris. I believe this was the previous section we were discussing as we kind of moved along. Judy Bennett said that these look like some of the best practices lists we were looking for earlier. So again, that's from about 10 minutes ago in the conversation. Mike said that he thinks a 2-drink maximum would be a good addition to the rules. And then I'm not sure, since Val's microphone is not functioning properly at the moment, Val made a comment that said, second, that facility/establishment is a better term than area. And they don't believe that this is the appropriate time for drink maximum discussions. But their hand is raised. So Val, if you want to give it a try to speak again. Oh, and okay. They just commented they would like to add that the public health principle of the least restrictive means holds that public health measures should interfere with the autonomous freedom of individuals to the least possible or necessary extent. So I believe that's Val's comment. Val, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. And again, we appreciate using the chat feature. Again, we'd like to see it more either as a supplement or, unfortunately, for those like Val who aren't able to use their mic. But if you are putting a comment in and you want it read out as a comment, thought, feedback, just raise your hand. And then again, if you're unable to use your mic, we'll go ahead and read it on your behalf. So I see some more activity in the chat.
Luke has said, what are the best practices for liquor boards? Is it normal for states to get involved in the rulemaking at this level? It seems like a slippery slope and labor intensive for the board to manage. Also, who determines that this is a high risk activity and relative to what, because we are hearing contrary information? Sorry if I am coming across negatively. And then Riley Harris added, yes, Val, thank you, and agrees with Luke.
Okay. So Luke's, okay, I appreciate the comment, Luke. I think that's a little more meta than this specific rule subsection, but I still appreciate where you're coming from with that. Okay, any other thoughts, comments, feedback, alternative language suggestions for this particular subsection? Seeing and hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the next section.
Nicola has her hand raised. Nicola, go ahead.
Hi, I'd like to address Luke's comment, and we appreciate everyone being forthright with how they feel, but I I tend to disagree with the rulemaking. Within any liquor establishment, we are tasked with public safety, and I think everyone's assuming that this is going to be a business model that only focuses on axe throwing and, kind of the best of the best. But once this type of activity opens up, it really means that any tavern, restaurant, any liquor business could add it. And so if we don't put some measures in place, then we're not really, holding up to what we need to do for public safety within the premises we license within Washington. And so while we're not trying to manage exactly how your business should operate, we do need to consider the impacts of liquor with what we consider to be a high-risk activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Nicola. This is exactly what I was talking about with expertise offered from persons within various divisions in our agency. I think that's an important perspective, and that's really appreciated. So I'm going to go ahead and move on now to, oh.
So Robert, there are a couple new comments, which is just Jennifer Zubay. She apologized. She got knocked off our call, so she missed a part of the conversation. But also Mike said, thank you, Nicola. I agree that public health standards need to be set for this activity. And a live new comment from Pacific Axis. To add to Luke's comment, we also wonder whether there is any hard data on considering the activity riskier than others, like examples like bowling, pool, and darts, etc. Injury reports, insurance claims should suffice.
Okay.
Otherwise, that's it for the comments.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we'll go ahead and move on then to the next subsection rule.
There was one more comment just made from Dave Quinn. A risky activity, can this be clearer by looking into the number of claims submitted to insurance companies from bars with darts, pool tables, sticks, and golf, where I've seen many accidents as a result from drinking. Never heard of any rulemaking concerns.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I mean, that's the feedback is appreciated. Whether it's specific, we have a hand raised from Kathy. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, thanks, Robert. Thanks everybody for the great discussion. Just kind of hoping to redirect our efforts back to the conceptual draft rules. I think some of the things that are coming up in the chat, definitely points of conversation, possibly things we might want to think about in separate conversations. But right now, hoping to kind of get at what Robert's directing here, and that is the strengths, weaknesses, and some proposed language for these rules. So just, and to both Tierney and Robert's point, if people can come off the chat box and offer oral comment, that's very helpful for everybody. So thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. And that's, I think that's as good a time as any to say we're going to move on now to the next rule subsection. Again, if you have any other comments that are outside of this topic or outside of the focus, you can always email us rules@lcb.wa.gov. We're happy to set up a time outside of this forum to have further discussion. So hold on one moment. Okay, so this fourth section is a new proposed section WAC 314.03.060 sub 2, C 1 and 2. Safety operating plan, the floor plan component. 15 minutes have been allotted for feedback on this particular rule subsection. Let me just switch screens again and get it set up. One moment. again, subsection C and sub 1 and 2 of C. If you can, what you like, what you don't like, suggested revisions, again, alternative language. We have 2 hands up. I'm not sure which one went first.
I think it goes in the order of David, then Emily.
Okay. Okay, David, go ahead. You're on.
Yeah, I like the language about the no bounce borders, but I would like to add wooden handle axes. In our experience, a lot of operators are using metal axes with rubber handles, which is a problem in the industry. And I think I'd like to see everybody in the industry move to wooden handle axes to help with the no bounce. You see these horrifying videos of axes bouncing back at people, and that, we believe, is caused by the metal handle axes hitting a rubber base and a hard backboard and coming back at people. In all our facilities, we have no bounce borders and we only use wooden handle axes. So I think that would be an important thing to add to the rules. Thanks.
Thank you, David. If I just follow up real quick, I appreciate that comment. I think that's some good feedback. One of the issues I think with respect to that is I don't see it fitting in this section around a floor plan component. Do you have any suggestions as to if something like that were added, where that would fit? Would it be in best practices for licensees for the industry? And if so, do you have more specific language you'd want to see incorporated into that? Again, that's out of scope of this particular subsection rule, but if you do have suggestions, that would be great.
Well, I think it does fit in this section because you're talking about anti-bounce barriers in this section, and that's all about bounce back and keeping people safe.
So you see it in kind of sub 2. So after you're discussing barriers, you could also provide examples of what type of axes might best help with the barriers and the bounce back issues.
Yeah, because this section is dealing with bounce back and safety, in the lanes. One other thing while I'm thinking about it, I mean, having a lid on your axe cages is helpful as well. That's what we do. We just never had it happen, but I never want to have one of my, facilities have an axe that came over the top of the cage. Our cages are 10 feet high, metal surrounds, and it has a closed back on them. A lot of facilities have open backs, and I just fear, that an axe would slip out of somebody's hand on their backswing. So we have, a back on our cages. They're completely enclosed with one door in. And I just think for the industry, I mean, if we can, when that video came out of the lady throwing an axe and bouncing back at her, it went into the audience behind her. And my business went down by 30% after that video came out. So I think just for the industry, we should, the safest, going along with what we're trying to do here is come up with really safe axe throwing businesses. We're not going to get shut down or lose business because of an accident. So I think we're all on the same page, trying to, make this as safe as possible. And the wooden handle axes is definitely something that we believe strongly that really helps with that. And I think it should be in this section when you're talking about no bounce borders and barriers.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for that feedback, David. I appreciate that. Okay,
So the next person is Emily, and then Val also made a comment that was addressing David's last comment. So I can read that out loud after Emily has said what she needs to say, and then we'll go to Riley Harris again.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Emily.
Perfect, thank you. My name is Emily Gant. I'm an attorney at Foster Garvey, and I'm here speaking for Flannel Jaxes. I had some questions about this subsection's use of the term barrier. And so oftentimes in other portions of the LCB's rules, there's references to barriers that are at least 42 inches high. It's unclear to me whether this rule is going to take the same approach, but I think that would be helpful to understand the LCB's thoughts on that aspect of things. On another note, it's unclear from this draft when there's conversations about barriers, if those barriers are required to kind of set the boundary between the axe throwing area and the designated consumption area, between each axe throwing lane, both. It will be helpful, particularly because there's a capital expense that's necessary when building out these facilities to give people pretty clear guidance there. What Flannel Jacks and its franchisees have liquor licenses in multiple places throughout the country. None of those other jurisdictions, they may require a barrier between the axe throwing area and the alcohol consumption area, but not necessarily between the lanes. And from a safety perspective, this hasn't posed a risk, as many have commented. These are places where there's a focus on safety. There are people that are there, a lumberjack, an axe marshal, whatever the term is for somebody there supervising. And so barriers between the lanes don't appear to be necessary from a public safety perspective. Barriers designating the space between the axe throwing lanes and the alcohol consumption areas is something that is more commonly seen in other places in the country. And then finally, I had a question about whether or not these barriers are intended to keep kind of axes within that lane, if they are intended to stop people from kind of inadvertently meandering into a lane, or something different, because that may help determine which types of barriers are appropriate.
Thank you for that, Emily. I think, so you're saying there's, from your perspective, there's some ambiguity with respect to how the word barriers is used. I think we try to provide some clarity from the second sentence where it says barriers should prevent axes from traveling out of the axe throwing lanes. However, I think from your feedback, you're saying you want a little more clarity on what that means. So you'd like to see a little more precise definition within this rule. Do you have any alternative language you would suggest for this?
Sure. I mean, that it is certainly possible that I've missed it over the years, but I am not aware of a place really anywhere in the LCB's rules that the term barrier is distinctly defined, even outside the axe throwing context. In virtually all other places, you'll see a reference to barriers that are at least 42 inches high. Most times that's really to signal to the guest where they can have alcohol and where they can't, in, say, an outside service area or things of that nature. And so if anything, it's simply unclear from because the term barrier isn't defined. Does it need to be a pony wall? Is it a net? Is it a U-bar? Is there flexibility in this? Sometimes the LCB will perhaps leave a term undefined to give people more flexibility in the way that they do so long as it's still safe. Ultimately, we are simply looking for some guidance on what are the things that would sufficiently qualify, because again, it's expensive to build out these facilities when you're doing it right, and people want to make sure that that construction is going to meet the LCB's needs.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Thank you for that. I appreciate the feedback. Did you have anything else to add? Oh, I see your hand's down now. Okay.
It is. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Oops.
Okay, who was next?
So Val.
And Val had problems with their microphone. So Val, entered comments. Is that right? Could Tierney, would you go ahead and read Valerie's comment?
Yes. So that Valerie had said that axe types have nothing to do with discussing floor plans, but also went on to say that no bounce borders are not required in order to provide a safe guest axe throwing experience. I think this kind of language is getting too far into the weeds on defining how a venue operates. I recommend striking the language about no bounce borders. Barriers as a general concept is good and recommend keeping it that. And there are a couple other comments, but then before we get to those, there was another hand up, which was Riley, and then the next is Daniel. So we'll go with Riley, we'll go back to the chat, and then we'll go to Daniel, if that works.
Can I ask just one thing, though, for those that have entered comments, unless your microphone's not working, I'd appreciate if you just raise your hand, and we'll just have you, if all you want to do is read your comment, that's fine. But we're trying to keep it in this discussion area. So we'll go through comment by comment. But if those of you that have written in, either in response to Val or in response to something else that's been spoken, if you want to raise your hand, and then we'll get to you in terms of reading your comment. I think that seems fair. So who was next?
Riley Harris.
I think it's me. This is Riley from Castellan. Hi. I just wanted to mention that I don't think it makes sense to get really technical, very specific about what these barriers look like, because many of your axe venues are already built, and the intention behind building these lanes is to protect their patrons. So being very specific about whether there's a lid or the height of, I mean, maybe you give a height of the walls, but not the material it's made out of or whatever that is. It's the comment that's there, the language that's there that says to protect axes from escaping the lanes, essentially, I think is sufficient. I think, like Val's mentioning, we can get way too far into the weeds and way too over-regulated when we're already doing our best to make sure that these are safe environments.
Okay, thank you for that. And Riley, you mentioned like a height for the barriers. Do you have any language to propose or any suggestions regarding that?
Honestly, I don't think I would suggest that anything is added, but if there was to be an addition at the request of other people who are participating here, I would say that is more than enough addition to say we want these barriers to be 8 feet tall, or some agreed upon number. But I would prefer that it's just not added. I think there's, as the attorney I think mentioned, there's capital expenditure that is involved here, and many of these places are already constructed. So putting undue financial burden on these places to meet, I guess, rules that were concocted mostly by people who don't actually, the LCB has their specialty, but axe throwing isn't it, right? So that's exactly the reason for this meeting. So I just don't want to see the rules get so detailed that it hinders people from being able to have businesses in the state of Washington.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for those comments, Riley. So I see Daniel Quinn and Matt Basin, have their hands raised. I know there's some more comments in the chat. Again, I wanted to stress, if your microphone is working, if you're able to speak, even if you've already written in the comments, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, and we can get you up. So having said that, Tierney, is Daniel Quinn next, or is there?
Yes, I think it'll make sense to do Daniel Quinn first, and then Matt can speak to what his typed comments were, and then we can address some other comments from someone else whose microphone is not working. Okay,
Great. Thank you. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, Daniel from Axe Pickers. I pretty much agree with kind of the rules. I think the section 2 there, about the barriers is could get a little weird with some facilities that might say like a brewery that wants to host an event and set something up on their premise. There's a lot of places around the country that do this. They have big events and they just have kind of freestanding A-frames with nothing really around it. But I think it does come down to more of the facility, making sure they have well-trained staff with keeping everyone safe, throwing axes in general. That's the more important part, rather than saying, you know, the facility has to have these kind of borders because everyone's just going to get crazy. So I don't really think Section 2 should really be in there. And then maybe down the road have some thought about some language about a temporary setup for places that might want to host an event. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. So up next we have Matt.
Thanks again, Robert. So we have had success just at our facilities. We do have individual lanes, and so there's a lot of different ways that axe throwing facility owners define what a lane is. And so just to be really clear, our definition of a lane is one single axe throwing target. What we did in our initial plan with the state of Washington was each individual lane does have its own individual barriers on the sides, the top, and the back. This is what we did for part of the pilot program. We have found success with that. I think to the point of what a lot of us are saying, and what I do agree with is I think to have rules that generally are as least restrictive as possible is a desirable goal. Having said that, I think all of us have seen axe throwing facilities that we think put kind of a bad mark or a bad look for the industry as a whole. And so I don't think that there shouldn't be any regulation. Obviously, that's why we're having this conversation. And so just to speak again clearly from experience, I do think it would be okay in this situation to call for barriers on the sides, on the top, and on the back of each throwing target or each axe throwing lane, however we want to collectively define that.
Okay. And so specifically to this, some of your feedback is maybe, again, be a little more specific as to what we mean by barriers and what we mean by lanes. Is that
That's correct, because some folks are going to define lanes as having 2 axe throwing targets in a single lane. Some folks might actually have 4 axe throwing targets in a single lane. And that's where there are no barriers between the targets themselves. And so people define that differently. As we mentioned in the very beginning of this call, there are international organizations and axe throwing organizations that define this differently. We very intentionally are not part of those organizations simply because we didn't think they had the correct safety standards. But that being said, I think some granular definition of, if we're going to create a barrier definition, we also have to have a little bit more specificity of what a lane actually is.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback, Matt. That's really appreciated.
So I will read off Dave Quinn's comments in the chat. A barrier requirement constructed with what? Will there be material requirements? And do you have a mock-up drawing of how a floor plan would be laid out? Just curious about your view on the consumption area.
Okay, appreciate those comments and questions. I don't think I'm the right person to speak on this. If there's someone else, again, from licensing, it could be Nicola or someone else that maybe, I don't think we're conceptualizing a mock-up of what floor plans have to look like. I don't think that's the intent. I appreciate the question though. I don't know if someone from licensing wants to speak to that question. I see 2 hands from licensing. Caitlin, go ahead.
Hi, it's Caitlin Bomba in the licensing division, policy manager. So we don't have materials in rule because we are trying to be more open about different things that could be used and not be super restrictive for what a barrier could be. We don't have a mock floor plan right now. I think that's something that we certainly could work on once the rules get established. And I don't know if there's anything else that I missed. reading through here. Anything else, Robert?
No, I think it's just a mock-up drawing and what would be the material requirements. So yeah, I think you spoke to both of those. Thank you so much.
So there is one more comment from Val, and I'll just go ahead and read that. And then Riley had her hand up next. So Val said that they agree about the need to designate the liquor service and consumption area from the throwing area, less about the regulations about between lanes. The language about axes traveling out of the lanes, are we talking about a lane with one target or two or four? How is this being defined is Val's question.
Okay. And I think the rule set as it is now, I don't think to what Caitlin was just saying, I don't think it does do that. And so there's been suggestions to maybe be more intentional with how we write up the meaning of barriers, how we write up the meaning of lanes. So I appreciate that. I think that's what the question is speaking to. Thank you for that, Val.
Riley is next, and then after Riley is whoever's representing Pacific Axis, and after them it's Jackie. So Riley, go on ahead.
Hi there, this is Riley from Casting Iron. So I want to make it very clear that the World Axe Throwing League lanes contain 2 targets, and that is absolutely required in order to host their league events. So it would be a real hindrance to business to say that each lane individually had to have both sides and back barriers, because if you put a barrier between lanes 1 and 2, for example, you are no longer considered a wattle facility and you cannot host their events. So that would be really bad for business for many of us who are already associated with the World Axe Throwing League. So at a minimum, a lane would need to be defined, at least in terms of barriers, as 2 target spaces, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Thank you. So that's with respect to restrictions from that association.
Yes, those are it. So those of us who are a part of World Axe Throwing League, we have set up our lanes in compliance with their regulations, which does place 2 lanes to 2 targets together for the purposes of competitions, because you cannot host competitions that are World Axe Throwing League competitions if you don't have your lanes set up that way. So if the LCB precluded us from having lanes that met the standard of wattle, then we wouldn't be able to participate in that association.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Riley. And that's why we're hosting these forums. Many of you in the forum know many things that we don't. You're the subject matter experts for that. So appreciate the feedback. I think, Riley, did you have anything else to add?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, thank you. So next, Pacific Axis.
Hello, everyone. This is TK with Pacific Access. And we just had a comment to add that we agree with the language that, for designated areas where alcohol is sold should be separate from kind of areas where people are throwing the axes. But we disagree with kind of the language being used for requiring barriers behind the axe thrower, because I think we believe that it's too limiting and defining what materials and the size. Nobody's requiring bowling alleys to kind of do the same thing, while they are allowed to sell alcohol on premises. So I believe that kind of adding that restrictive language is not gonna work with everyone, and it's not gonna allow us to be flexible in what we do.
Okay, and so your comment is that you see it now it's flexible enough for your business model, but you're saying adding additional restrictions might make it more difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's going to cost money to put in the barriers that are going to be, after all, approved if they are approved. And we have the separators in between the lanes. We have kind of everything set up to be as safe as possible. But I believe kind of putting in hard language requiring specific barriers and specific materials, I think that's too much.
Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Did you have anything else to add?
Nope.
Okay.
All right, Jackie, you're next. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I just wanted to say that I am wanting to have the most public safety as possible if this goes forward, because alcohol has had some problems when it's involved with many different types of activities. I support this section, maybe being more specific, and appreciate the people who are already experienced with these types of venues, their comments. Feels to me that there should be a minimum standards for the floor plan, and it has to be a little bit more specific. Not only that, but if it does not meet those minimums, I would like to say that the proposed floor plan should be very detailed, and I'll be as bold to say, are there ever any inspections to make sure that safety is the #1 consideration? For example, I've done home remodels, and there's always a licensed inspector that comes to make sure that this is in the best interest of everybody involved.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you mentioned that. That kind of segues very nicely into subsection 3 of the rules. And we're running a little behind. So unless there are additional comments on this particular subsection, I'm going to move on to 3. All right, moving on to subsection 3. This 5th section is a new proposed section, WAC 314.03.060 sub 3, Safety Operating Plan, Change Request Procedures. So 10 minutes have been allotted for feedback on this section. Again, what you like, what you don't like, suggested revisions, and if possible, specific alternative language proposed. Any thoughts, comments on this? All right, let's take a pause. We'll give it another minute, and then if we have no additional comments on this, we'll move on to section 4. Let me just check again real quick with Tierney and Jeff if we're caught up on the comments from the comments chat.
Luke had made a comment agreeing with the last statement from Pacific Axis about not requiring barriers behind the axe thrower. Otherwise, we are completely caught up. That was right before we shifted to this. And now we have a hand up by Judy and a second hand by Val. So Judy, go ahead.
Oh, hi. I guess I'm just not clear about what changes this document refers to as changes to come into compliance?
Hi, Judy. That's a good question. Actually, it's Section 2 is all on the safety operating plan, and the safety operating plan is required to allow the activity of axe throwing in a liquor licensed premises. And so any change made to the components of Section 2 would need to be submitted to the board.
But if there are requirements, do we have the ability to change those?
I think it means more once you've, and perhaps licensing can speak to this too, but I think it's if you have set up, been established, and been inspected and been approved to have this activity and on your liquor license premises, and then wish to change your floor plan, wish to change any of the components of the safety operating plan, you need to resubmit the safety operating plan and have another.
I understand.
Before you're then allowed to do this activity again.
Okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a regulatory. You failed inspection and now you're resubmitting. It's strictly. But maybe if someone from licensing can address this in a better way, Caitlin or John, either or.
Hi, Robert. It's Caitlin. I agree with what you said. That was our understanding, is if there was a change to the floor plan or something like that, to submit a change request for that. So you're correct.
Okay. Okay, Judy, did you have a follow-up question or?
No, I lowered my hand.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Judy. So I think the only hand up is Val.
Correct. So Val, do you want to enter your comment into the chat, or is your microphone working? Either way, I'm happy to read it out loud. All right, so Val has said the safety plan includes monitoring consumption in addition to floor plan, etc. I believe that a requirement to submit a plan to the board will limit business innovation and operation. If a venue intends to create more restrictive measures that enhance their customer safety, for instance, they will not be able to implement those measures until the Washington LCB board approves them. It seems unnecessary and burdensome.
Okay. Appreciate those comments, Val. Do you have any alternative language that you'd like to propose that would both maintain this provision, but would speak to your concerns?
Val hasn't put anything in the chat yet, but I expect they might be typing a response.
Okay. While we're waiting, let me just check. Is anyone else going to be offering feedback on this whole section? Okay, so while we're waiting for Val to determine whether or not they're going to type a follow-up, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the final rule section.
Val's suggested alternative language: if implementing less restrictive, then must submit anything more restrictive. Hold on one second. There's some chatter in my background. One moment. So yes, alternative language. If implementing is less, sorry, she fixed her typing. Should not be required.
Okay, and then I see Nicola just raised her hand. Nicola, did you want to speak to Val's suggestion?
Hi, yes. So
I just wanted to state that this type of language wouldn't be specific just to this business model. Currently, any restaurant that serves alcohol, if they make changes to their floor plan, like the adding of tables or a dining area or an extra bar, they do submit those changes in. It is not a lengthy process like an initial application process or anything like that. It is really more so that our enforcement office has a current floor plan on file. Should they visit the business, they are aware of what the surroundings are going to be when they go into it. It also is similar to sports entertainment facilities. We also obtain operating plans from them. And anytime changes are made, they will submit an updated operating plan. So in no way would it be this long delay of trying to expand your business or anything of that. And I just want to let you know that we aren't pinpointing just this business model. It is common. I mean, it's actually practiced for every single liquor license business within this state and cannabis.
Thank you, Nicola. That was wonderful. I think Val's response speaks to that. That there might have been some confusion around that. I think from their response, thank you for the clarification. That's helpful. I think they're okay with that response. So moving on to sub 4. It's the final section. It's WAC 314.03060 sub 4 safety operating plan penalty structure. I've allotted 10 minutes, but I don't suspect we'll use all 10. It's what you like, what you don't like, and any suggested revisions for alternative language. And here we are. And again, this is just the penalty structure. It's so I don't see any hands raised. Are there any additional comments in the chat that we might have missed?
Not on this new section. Dave Quinn had said something to the former. Submitting a safety plan, how strict will this be in its appearance? Will we need a lawyer / architect, etc., also including the initial floor plan? But again, that was the last section.
Sure. Nicola, go ahead, Nicola. Or Caitlin, either or.
Oh,
Both.
sorry. Oh, Caitlin, go ahead. Okay, I'll go. No, you would definitely not need an architect or anything of that. You know, honestly, I think 90% of the floor plans we receive are drawn out by the applicant themselves. It's really, with spirits, you do to scale, but it's by a 1 inch per square foot type thing. But no, a handwritten, drawn out floor plan is usually what we receive from most applicants.
Thank you for that, Nicola.
And Daniel has his hand raised.
Thank you.
Yeah, I missed the first kind of half of all this. I don't know if it was mentioned at all, but I was just curious because I know a lot of venues run mobile units. And I was wondering what the restrictions would be on a kind of like a bar, allowing them to come onto their facility and what that mobile structure would have to look like as far as the requirements for that. Thank you.
That's a good question. I think it falls out of the scope of this particular forum. That's not really. I don't think based on the way the rules are, as the conceptual draft rules are as written, that would be an allowable activity. Having said that, again, Daniel, I think that's out of scope of this particular forum and this particular rule. But if you have some suggestions, thoughts, or concerns, and you want to talk with us at a later date, you're always welcome to. Feel free to email us. It's rules@lcb.wa.gov. If you want to set up a meeting just to talk with us about your thoughts on that, that's fine. Did you have any follow-up with respect to the penalty structure? No. Okay. I think that is it. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Oh, I see one hand up. Sorry,
Mike,
is that
go ahead. It's
Mike?
Mike Graham Squire.
Thanks. I did have one question. I noticed in a quick search online that some existing establishments are open to kids ages 10 or 13. And just wanted to see how that was going to be addressed if alcohol is added into these establishments. I understand that some of these may occur at age-restricted venues like bars, but it seems like some of the existing ones are not age-restricted. Thanks.
I think I could have licensing follow up, but I think in general the idea is that the restrictions that are on the particular license that is held would also restrict access in that nature. So if a particular licensee had a certain type of license that would otherwise restrict minor access, then it would remain restricted because of that license. Did anyone from licensing want to add to that or clarify a little more fully? Yes, Caitlin, go ahead.
Nope, you're correct, Robert. We wouldn't have any additional restrictions just for this axe throwing activity. It would be with what the license, those restrictions would apply, but nothing additional specific for axe throwing.
Okay. Thank you. Of course, I mute myself at the end. Thank you all for your feedback today. We'll take all your comments on these rules and analyze them. We will also take them to the board to review and discuss. Let me pause real quick. Did we just get another comment in?
We did. It's from Dave Quinn. He says, mobile axe throwing is currently not allowed on the property of anyone who holds a liquor license. Is this accurate?
Go ahead, Nicola.
Go ahead.
So yes, based on the licensed premises, that's why we have rulemaking in place. I know there are some locations that have maybe had axe throwing like a parking lot over and that type of thing that may not fall within our jurisdiction. But hearing the mobile question, that really does bring up a good point, and I think some conversation that we'll need to take back and discuss further. So we definitely appreciate all of that input.
Yeah, I'm echoing Nicola in that. That there's some further discussion I think that needs to be had with respect to that. So wrap up. Some of your feedback might be incorporated into the rule proposal that we submit to the board. At this point, we're moving towards a rule proposal in March. We may need to move that date out depending on whether additional review and analysis is needed, based in large part on your comments from today and also written comments that were submitted previously. The comments you offered are very helpful in rule development. They're not considered formal comments. However, we do include all of the comments from today in the CR 102 package so that anyone who reviews the rule package will understand the course of the discussion during our rule development. So I want to encourage everyone to visit the Liquor and Cannabis Board website. We'll have the recording of this session posted to the website shortly, and we will also share the comment table that we put together incorporating feedback you have shared in this session. I'd like to thank everyone for the great participation. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this rule project. With that, I will close. So everyone have a great day. Oh, and one last thing, it's my contact information on the front, both email and phone. So if you have any additional thoughts, comments, concerns, questions, or any other follow-up you might want after this meeting is over, feel free to call or email. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Kathy,
Robert.
go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Well, another question for Robert.
Yep.
Is the recording of this meeting going to be available on the website? Did you say
The
that?
recording, yes, I did say that, and it will be available on the website. It will be with the current meeting materials. So there is a pending link that is for this video, and it's going to be uploaded to it as soon as we finish this and can get the video processed. So good question. Thank you, Kathy.
You bet. I just wanted to make sure I was doing something else. I just want to make sure that we shared that with folks. So thanks, Robert.
No problem. Thank you all again, and I hope you all have a great lunchtime and a great day.
Thank you, Robert.